About a month ago, I got myself a new group of Celestial Pearl Danios to help me do a few tests and experiments, particularly on equipment for collecting eggs. CPD fry are pretty dumb, but the adults spawn easily and consistently, so they're perfect for testing out any kind of an egg collector. It's been a few years since I last covered this fish, and back then I remember showing an egg trap that was deliberately primitive. I used an 8-ounce plastic container, much like this one, with a bit of vegetation to demonstrate how effective even a simple egg trap can be. Its major downside is that nothing, other than visual obscurity and constant distraction, prevents the adults from eating the eggs right after they're laid. You still get plenty to work with, but it's not very efficient. The next step up for an egg trap is to use some kind of coarse screen or mesh to hold the spawning media above the trap and keep fish from swimming down into it. Ideally, the eggs will fall down through the mesh where they'll be safe from predation. But this style brings its own downsides. It doesn't do much to keep this moss contained, or the fish as they spawn around it and in it. Many eggs could be released, but never find their way down into the trap. What's worse, a mild cross-current or even the erratic movement of the fish can knock the moss off the top of the trap and send it rolling across the tank like a tumbleweed. So you can go one step further. Get a taller container, cut the mesh just right to rest somewhere in the middle of its depth, and set the moss on top of it. Here you have protection for the eggs, a little more shelter around the spawning media, and a bit more resistance to hurricanes. Getting all the parts set up just right can feel a bit fussy, but the point is, with a little DIY, you can make yourself a perfectly acceptable egg trap that reasonably addresses the primary criteria for usefulness. Recently, I decided to make something a little more solid and purpose-built to address those criteria even better. Once again, I turned to the 3D printer to solve my problems for me, and this is what I came up with. It's 4.5 inches square and 3.2 inches tall. Most of that height is above the screen to wall off the spawning area. I left the front wall open, and that's mostly for visibility and monitoring, but also to keep the fish comfortable going inside. Sometimes they get nervous about swimming down into a taller container, and this leaves them feeling like they have more angles to escape from. They don't feel cornered. The mesh screen slides in and out like a drawer, and can be fully removed to expose a compartment below where all the eggs would be. The screen also has a wall around the perimeter that's just over a half-inch tall. This is here to allow the trap to be used for rock spawners without those rocks rolling off as the screen is removed. The mesh itself leaves openings that are just under a 1/4 inch square, which should be fine enough to keep all but the smallest fish from entering the egg compartment. And lastly, I recently added a small drain just below the mesh screen to make the whole thing easier to remove from the water. I haven't changed this design much from the first prototypes, but one thing I did notice was that the parts could fit together so tight that water would be held all the way to the top of the screen. So I would have to crack it open slightly and let that water drain out, or else I'd have a mess on my hands later when I set it down to check for eggs. And that's about it. Egg traps aren't complicated, I just want this to be an especially nice one. So let's take it for a test drive. I set this up in the evening and gave the fish until morning to check it out and get comfortable with it. I was hoping that they would wake up in the morning and go right for it. And that's exactly what happened. So here they are, doing their CPD thing, and I let this go for a few hours until they seemed to have lost interest. Later that day, I pulled the trap to see what was inside. What I found was pretty impressive. As soon as I took off the mesh screen, I could see small, amber-hued eggs all over the bottom. I removed some of the debris and condensed them into a smaller container for a better look. This is, without a doubt, the most CPD eggs I've ever seen in one place or coming from one spawn. A few already show clear signs of infertility, but that's to be expected. The sheer number is just unreal to me. It's not actually important to me to breed more CPDs right now, I really just wanted eggs, but I couldn't resist seeing how this would play out. I transferred the eggs to a fry tray to see how they would do. Like I said, it's been a couple of years since I bred these last, and I've forgotten what a weird fish this is. The eggs take about 3 days to hatch, and after that, the fry just lay around for about a week before free swimming. I shouldn't be shocked because I've seen this before, but I've dealt with so many species in the last few years where the fry would never survive a week without some kind of calories coming in. These are just weird. They made it here nonetheless, in all their grand and terrifying number. If any of you feel like counting, feel free. So far, this looks like a win for the egg trap and a somewhat apocalyptic event for my paramecium supply. Your thoughts and prayers for their well-being are appreciated. In other news, I made a second version with approximately double the area for larger species, and I've been working on some other interesting egg collecting tools that I'll share more on soon. And I will add these to the standing inventory on Patreon and Etsy if you want one for yourself. If you're part of the Patreon crowd, give me just a bit to make sure I have all the parts oriented correctly, and I'll get the STLs posted for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.